So today, what we're going to be looking at is building a full stack app with everything that we've learned, right? We got a bit of a preview of that several weeks ago with Flask, but now that you all have learned Django, we are going to fully dive in. And the main focus today and kind of the heart of the full stack app is setting up authentication. So we're going to use some Django and React code that we're already familiar with for the to-do app that I'll kind of walk us through in a minute. And we're going to see how to use Axios on the front end to talk to our Django API backend and authenticate and talk about cross-origin resource sharing and what it is and what we have to do to sort of work around it. And then we're going to see how to implement a lot of front-end logic and user flows for authentication and having authenticated pages. Today, we don't have a workshop sort of assignment in the middle. So I think my goal will be to sort of scope the lesson to 2 hours with a bit of a break on the hour. And then this afternoon is really focused on personal projects, and that'll sort of be the case moving forward. We have a couple other lessons this week, but really we're shifting into personal project mode and things for like interview practice and stuff like that. So do folks have any questions before we get started? Okay, awesome. And just to give a little more preamble and pull up a relevant bit of the curriculum. So with full stack development, we are combining all the things that we've learned. Just to recap, it might have felt like a million years ago, but we did an awful lot on the front end with React and HTML and CSS and JavaScript. And now we're going to be using Axios to make HTTP requests, not to say the Pokemon API from our React app, though we may do that to other third-party APIs as well, but to our own API that we've now learned to write in Django. And in Django, we've learned how to write a lot of server-side logic, store our data in a database, and the basics of API design so that we can now write our own, it's called a REST is the acronym, API for our front end to consume. And as you get into your personal projects, you will be spending more and more time thinking about sort of designing your database, and again, using all the things that you've learned here. RESTful APIs we've talked about and been using a lot with Django, and we're going to use them now in our own apps to sort of follow the patterns, the modern patterns of how to write an API. And version control, you all have some experience with. We are actually going to have part 1 of a Git workshop this Friday that will dive deeper into Git. And as you get into your personal projects, you absolutely should be committing and pushing code often. And then later in the week, we will have a couple lectures on a little bit about deployment, a little less so about scalability, and a little more focus on the fundamentals of like deploying to AWS. So if folks want to look in the curriculum for today, there is a link to the application that we're using in I have to hunt around a bit, but we have a task manager app. And I think I pulled it up already in the demos and notes repo, so I've walked through it there, but just so you're all aware, this is what we're working off of, and it's linked to in today's lesson and in our Code Platoon curriculum GitHub org. So let's just do a quick tour of this application before we dive in. And let's start with the Django backend stuff, since that's what we were just doing. So, I've already pulled down the project. I created the database, I ran it, so hopefully nothing is failing. If I'm looking at a new Django project, the first thing I'm going to look at is what's the name of the database. The next thing I'm going to look at is requirements.py to see what packages are installed, and there's no surprises there. And then the next thing I'm going to look at is the URLs py in the main project directory, because this sort of lays out the routes for our app, and we see that we have users and lists for to-do app. Sources, this is just holding data that we might want to use. Note that there is code here for more of the to-do list with tasks and subtasks. We're not going to focus on those so much today. We're going to be focusing mainly on users. So let's go ahead and take a look at users real quick, just to refresh ourselves. So we're using an API view here, so there's not a lot to see in the URL routing. And here we should see, and I apologize, I'm actually in tasks app instead of the users one. There we go. So here we see that we've got these different routes: sign up, log in, log out. That should be pretty familiar by now. And we're using these 3 different API view classes. And there's not a lot of surprises here. We've got sign up, and there's a lot of code here, but it's what we've been spending the last 2 weeks digging into. And this creates a user account for us. And I know that I'm going to have to send an email address and a password. And then for login, I know I'm also going to have to send an email address and a password. And then we have logout, and we have an info class here. And I'm going to check and see if we have a route for that at the moment. Not yet. So I may add that one when we get there. And if I look, I see that the info class, in fact, returns the user information. The front-end application is also on the straightforward side and is code that we've seen before. Just to sort of refresh ourselves, let me go to the package.json. And I see that we've got React Bootstrap, and we've got Axios, and we've got React Router and all the things that we expect. In React, can someone remind me actually, like, what's a good file to look at first to get like a big picture view of a React app? Adrian, yes, sir.
Would it be app or the router?
Yeah, I think both of those are great. Router is a good starting point, right? Because here we can see our routing logic. I can see that the app is sort of the parent component for the whole application on the root path. We've got a home page, we've got a sign up page, we've got a login page. If I go take a quick look at app.jsx, we see that there's a little bit of state here for user stuff, but we're not doing a ton with it yet. And then if I go into main, just as a reminder, this is where we hook up the router provider. And if I look at login and sign up, they're empty pages, and we're going to create these and fill these out, as is the home page. And then there's a bit of a nav bar that, again, should look familiar from the React stuff that we learned before in the React assessment. So I am going to spin both of these up and just make sure they're running. And right now I'm in the front end application. So I'm going to go ahead and run the Vite dev server.
Good morning. How are you doing, sweetie? Mommy left to go take grandma to the. Oh.
We had. Thank you. Perfect. I was about to jump on
Sorry
that.
about that.
All good. All good. So we've got. I can see that my front end app is working, and I'll open up the console because I know I'm going to make a mistake at some point, and I want to get that data, that error data. And we're going to hook this up pretty soon to Django. And let me go ahead and start my Django server too and make sure that all of that's working. And once you start doing full stack development for your personal projects, this is going to be your workflow. Let's see, I need to go into deployment app, and I'm going to then need to go into the backend directory. And this is a pretty reasonable organization, by the way, of a full stack application. There are different ways that people do it, but making a directory named backend and another named front end or client and server, if you prefer, is a perfectly reasonable and pretty common pattern that you'll see, and how I would recommend organizing your personal projects as a starting point. So it's really two separate applications, but in one Git repository. And if we were on a much bigger team, they might be two separate repos, but that just adds unnecessary complexity for what we're doing and for our personal projects. So I've already created the database. I actually did not make my migrations, now that I think about it. So I'm going to run make migrations to make sure that all the migrations there are created. And let's see, no module named Django. So this, I did not do this on purpose, but 3 guesses. Why can't I run my migrations for my Django app? Edge, yes, sir.
You're in two different default environments. Not, and my guess is you probably have a different environment that's specific to this project that you need to be in, and then you would install the requirements.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know how I ended up in 2 different default environments. That is especially weird, but that is exactly it. You could use the default environment if you want for your personal project. What might be easiest at this point, especially since you'll be heads down in this project, is I did create a virtual environment directory in my backend directory. I also added the name of the virtual environment directory to a .gitignore file, so it's not checked into version control. I might even turn off the script that turns on the default virtual environment at this point, if I want to. But that's exactly the error that I made, and that's a common, and I think an easy mistake to make. So now I should be cooking. Now I should have the right virtual environment. And I had a hint before, by the way, because I was trying to run make migrations and it was not giving me the tab completion. So there are no migrations that need to be created, but I have not applied them. So let me go ahead and apply those to my database. And now let me go ahead and run my Django server. Awesome. So now that's up and running, and I'm going to go to localhost 8000. And I can see here, there's no lists, there's no authentication credentials, which is fine. We haven't done any of that yet. But this is exactly what I want to see, just that my Django server is up and running. So now I kind of know I've got the 2 parts of my application running, and I'm good to go to start building stuff. So we're going to focus on the sign up and login views today. And actually, if I hop over to the lesson, we have them listed out here. So we've got sign up, login, logout, slash users for sort of informational purposes, and a test endpoint. So the first thing we have to do is get Axios talking to Django. And then when we start dealing with authentication, and in fact, even before then, we're going to run into an issue called cross-origin resource sharing. But let's use this test endpoint and just get Axios and Django to say hello. And let me make sure that that is there and up and running. And it looks like actually we might need to add that in Django really quick. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I think what I'm going to do is here in the backend, I think I'll just add it here in. Well, actually, let's just add it in. Yeah, I'll just add it here in the user app just for simplicity. Actually, I think I will put this in the URLs PY for the project. Oh, Francisco, yes.
Hey, Adam, by any chance, can you tell me what branch you're currently on?
Oh, yes. I pulled off of the main branch of the deployment app.
Got it. The init branch is the one that's gonna have everything for the lecture, including that test endpoint that you're looking for.
Oh, got it. I'm so sorry. I didn't even got it. Okay. That'll work even better then. Perfect. Thank you.
It's within the to-do project URLs.
Got it. Thank you, man. Let me go ahead and deactivate the virtual environment. And let's go ahead and because of what I did was I kind of got rid of the Git repo because I pulled this into Whiskey's demos and notes. So I think what I will do is delete that, and we're going to just clone this again. And let me go ahead and with me just 1 sec here, folks. Yams, yes, sir. What's up?
Can we just check out to the init branch if we clone this?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to do now. What I did before was I cloned it and I deleted the .git directory because this is inside the other demos and notes repo. So I didn't want a repo inside a repo.
Okay.
Yeah, but this should not take that long to do exactly that. And let's go ahead and go into the front end. And let's install our front end dependencies. Yeah, thank you so much for pointing that out, Francisco. That was totally something I overlooked. So awesome. Front end is now set up and running. Let's go ahead and set up the back end again. And I may have to do, I'm going to do a little sort of a cheat move here because I want to grab a requirements.py with all of the Django dependencies that I need. So I'm just going to go into our most recent Django lesson. And from here, grab the requirements PY because I know this has pretty much everything we need. I'm going to just paste that in there. And now deactivate the virtual environment. Create a new one in here. Activate it. Install the requirements, which has everything that we need for Django and Django REST framework and PsychoPG and all that good stuff. And now I do just want to, I think just for the sake of sanity, I'm just going to, in fact, drop the database I created and just recreate it. I'm going to create the to-do database. And this way I don't have to worry about any potential migration issues. I'm just going to make my migrations and apply them fresh. And now I should be able to run the server if I had spelled that command correctly. Awesome. And Francisco, thank you so much for pointing that out, because that saved us a little bit of a headache there. So now we're kind of back where we wanted to be. I have this test endpoint, and we're actually going to use this to hook up Axios, and we're going to see what we run into along the way. So let me go ahead and open up my front end code. And let's just do this in app.jsx, because we just want to kind of test this out. So now I'm in app.jsx of Axios, and I'm going to close out some of these other things that we're not using, or excuse me, app.jsx of React. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to import Axios. And I don't remember off the top of my head if this needs to be a named import or if this is the default import. A named import with the curly brackets looks like that. But I'll try using it and see if I run into any issues, and we can go from there. And normally, in fact, I will write an async function for this. Let's just call this test connection. And I'll just rename this test connection. We're jumping back and forth between the Python and the JavaScript naming conventions a lot. And I'm making an arrow function here that is also going to be an async function. And we are going to await the HTTP GET request that Axios is going to make. And we could use localhost or the IP address of 127.0.0.1, I believe. Localhost is in fact an alias for the IP address 127.0.0.1, which that is a special IP address that always identifies our own machine. And let's just console log the response and see what we get. And I am going to use a use effect now to do this the proper way so that React knows that we are doing a side effect, that we are making an HTTP request, and that can control the order in which that executes. And so now if I hop back over here to my homepage, and it looks like a bunch of stuff was happening there. And in fact, I didn't do this on purpose, but I made the classic use effect error of not including my empty array for my dependency list. And I was getting an infinite loop. And it looks like, let's see here. So that was the issue. Let's try just killing and restarting the Vite dev server. There we go. So it is easy to get confused with this stuff. I often will have it split so I can see both. I think for learning purposes, it's easy to maybe just have it be one. And this is the interesting error, uncaught Axios network error that we want to see. Francisco, yeah.
So I see you're getting that on-call Axios network error, but your Django server doesn't seem to be receiving the request at all. Is it because we didn't include the port in the URL?
You are totally right. Thank you so much. I totally missed that, guys. let's try that again. And in fact, now we get the request right here. Yeah, thank you so much, man. And I saw a couple other hands up. I'm guessing that those were folks going to mention the same thing about the missing port. Cool. So we ran into one or two issues along the way. We were able to resolve them. And now we can take a look at the issue that we kind of want to look at, which is we get this interesting error. We can now see here that we indeed are successfully making the GET request, because here in the Django server logs that I have here in the terminal, we see that we get this GET request on API/test. But if we look at this console message that shows the response, it says access has been blocked by CORS policy, no access control origin. And in fact, if I go here in the network tab, and here I can filter the different kinds of HTTP requests the browser makes. Like here's all the ones to get CSS assets. Here's the ones for JavaScript files. And relevant for us, here are the ones that are coming from Fetch or Axios. And so I can see right here, and I always use the network tab as my source of truth for like what my front end application is actually sending to the server. And we can see here, we made the request successfully. We got a response, but the response was an error. And in fact, I think we have to go back. They kind of break it up into parts if you look at it this way, because there's invalid over here. And in some ways, looking at it in the console is probably a little easier because it's all in one spot. So let's talk a little bit about CORS, or the cross origin policy, what it is, why we're getting this error, and how to deal with it. So CORS stands for cross origin resource sharing. And origin here is referring to like, what's the origin of the web page that the browser is loading, or the origin of the JavaScript file. And if we think about our full stack application now, I have everything but the database in here because we don't have to worry about the database. Our browser talks to the Vite dev server, which is a separate server program running right over here, and makes HTTP requests to get index.html and then app.jsx and all of our other things. And then that's the React app is loaded and running in the browser. And then, so this stuff happens first. And then once the browser is loaded, it makes a GET request. In this case, to get API test. And then that, right, then we got back the CORS error HTTP response, which was, if we look, we can probably see I'm actually not sure what the response code is off the top of my head for cores. I would have to look that up. But to pop back to TL draw, so cross origin means here that the JavaScript making our request was loaded from a different server than we're requesting to. So cross-origin resource sharing is to help prevent web pages from making requests to a domain other than the one that served the original web page. It's safety rules that are implemented by the browser to prevent web pages from making requests to a different domain than the one that served the original page. And the classic scenario here is if instead of Django and a Vite dev server, if this was, say, my bank, and we load the web page, but somewhere along the way, someone malicious maybe manages to inject some malicious JavaScript into the actual like JS that the Citibank sends back to my browser, or maybe someone intercepts the traffic at some point, or maybe like my auth token is stored in my browser's local storage and I log on later, but it's not actually Citibank. And someone fools my browser into thinking that this malicious fake Citibank site is actually the legit Citibank, and then they could get me to do stuff that would reveal personal identifying information about my bank account and so on. So this was an issue in the early days of the web. So as a rule, browsers don't allow HTTP requests to a different domain than the one that served the original page. And I always get a little hung up on describing that correctly. What we're going to see in a moment is we can add some settings to Django and to our React app to work around this and safely work around it, which is a common thing that we need to do. But I just want to check in to see what questions folks have around this concept, because this is, I think, the big one in terms of sort of full stack applications and stuff. Edge, yes, sir.
Yeah, you mentioned like the example with the malicious other servers. Yeah, is there a way that you can like whitelist specific servers, and then if it's not one of the ones that you have pre-approved, it would automatically like block the connection to prevent stuff like that?
You hit the nail on the head, and that's exactly what we're going to see in a bit is we can create, they call it allowed origins. And we can set that to allow certain cross origins to be okay, but not others.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Brian, yes, sir.
Sir, the behavior of the original request is kind of confusing to me. Like Django responded with the 200, and it was the browser that said, hey, you're missing this header, so I'm going to throw an error. And so by adding this allowed origin on our Django app, saying, okay, Django, yes, we're going to allow localhost 5173. And the change in Django, I mean, either way, Django looks like it's going to send back a 200. The only difference is this time Django will include another header that the client browser will then accept. It just seems like the responsibilities in the wrong place. Like in your malicious bank example, all the malicious bank would have to do is, allow all, and the client browser would be none the wiser. I'm just not sure why they designed it that way.
That it's a good question. So to kind of break that down piece by piece, And to be honest, I always find cores a little confusing, so I kind of have to break it down piece by piece. So you're totally right that the browser enforces the rules around cores. And I think the interesting thing is actually hiding here in the error message. And so first off, Brian, you're totally right that it is actually the browser that enforces cores rules, though if we look at our response to that test endpoint, we did not get any data back. And in fact, let's pull up in the backend and see what, if anything, we should have gotten back. Let's go to the to-do project and let's go to URLs py and let's see where the connection test is hiding. So this is, and Francisco, thank you so much for pointing out about using the other branch. So this is the main URLs py for our Django project. And here's the API/test endpoint. And it calls this little function connection test that we just wrote up here. And that should return an HTTP response saying test connection was successful, we are connected. So the interesting thing to note here is you're absolutely right. We did get back a 200 response, though there's also I think DevTools kind of shows this in a weird way because they kind of broke it into two. We see clearly that there's some sort of strict cross-origin thing happening here. But the important thing to note here is that we did not get back that data in the response. And so the Django server is enforcing these cross-origin rules. And so it is sort of, I don't want to say both the browser and the server, though the browser enforces, the server sets rules about what data it sends back, and then it can also tell the browser. And if we look at this error message right here, there's sort of a hint where it says no access control allow origin header is present on the requested resource. So this is where some of the terminology gets confusing. The resource here is this endpoint /API/test. And what the browser is telling us is, hey, we made the GET request to our API. We made the GET request to API/test. And Django said, hey, like, I'm not allowing any other origins to look at this data. So it sent back a response. But let's see if we can, I'm not sure if we can actually see the response headers, but what we'll see when we add cores is Django will actually send in the response a header of allowed origins, and the browser will use that, among other things, to enforce some of these rules. And it's kind of hiding in here. If we look at the response headers from /test, where it says cross origin opener policy, same origin. So in the HTTP response from our Django server, there's all these response headers, most of which are created by default. Like there's one here where Django tells the browser the kind of content that it's sending it, which is text/HTML. So, you know, that would be JSON when we send back JSON, but Django kind of does all that for us. And one of these headers is Django telling the browser like what origins are allowed. So Django doesn't send back the data. So it enforces that rule, but then it also tells the browser what the rules are. And I think that is then maybe the browser is using that to display error messages and do other things. To be totally honest, I'm not 100% certain what the browser does with this header, because you're correct that we need to kind of have the security enforced server side. And I realized that I went a a bit roundabout in explaining that. So I just want to check in to see if that helps and what other questions kind of folks have around this and around the basic idea of cores.
Thank you, sir. Sorry for the confusing question. Interesting, it sends back a 200.
Yeah, I agree. We can probably change that somewhere in our Django app if we wanted to. If I had to guess, it might send back a 200 for, it's probably not for security reasons. For like passwords, like for instance, for emails, you're not supposed to say if someone tries to log in, like this email account doesn't exist, because someone malicious could try to use that to figure out if someone has an email account or not. But since the browser is throwing a CORS header, that's a pretty clear indication of the issue. So I'm honestly not sure why it sends back a 200 response. The CORS stuff is can be a bit funky. What does browser do with CORS? So I will share, I actually think Amazon has an excellent explanation of cross-origin resource sharing. And this is, the bank example is sort of the classic one, but they lay it out really nicely here, where the victim logs into the bank, and then I'm tricked into loading an external website on a new browser tab. And the external website then uses my credentials that are stored in like a cookie on my browser, and sends information to the bank while pretending to be me. So it's in fact even maybe a little more complicated. And that's sort of where this same origin policy evolved from. And the same origin policy is that the browser or clients can only send requests to a resource with the same origin as our URL. And we're going to see we can make this allowed whitelist. The Mozilla Web Docs go through this as well, and they go a bit more in depth, and that could be good reading as well. And let me throw both of these in our resources channel. And as I said, to be totally honest, I get a bit confused with CORS sometimes, and I think the key thing to remember is that by default, the browser sets rules about only making HTTP requests to the same origin, and the server will also not accept requests from different origins unless we tell it that that's okay. Yeah, that is an excellent point about the 200 response though, Brian. And in fact, let's go ahead and let's see how to deal with some of this stuff. And of course, with Django, there's a library that we can use that will help us. And there's some things that we're going to do for development to make our lives a little easier. Because CORS is kind of a notorious pain in the butt when doing like full stack development work, because it's really nice to have a dev server and Django running on two different things. So there's a Django CORS headers package that we're going to go ahead and install. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and do this right now. I'll run freeze to update requirements.txt. And so we are going to go into settings py, and I'm just going to do it this way because there's too many settings py's that coming up when I search. And we are going to add this to installed apps. And it's going to be called CORS headers. So we're using the Django CORS headers library to deal with this cross-origin resource sharing issue. And when we install it, we have to add it to installed apps. and we also have to add it to middleware. And I know we've talked a little bit, but not a lot about middleware. Can someone maybe take a stab at just describing what middleware is or does on a high level? Yams, yes, sir.
So when you make a request, it's something that happens in between the request, is the way that I understand it.
Yeah, you are on the right path. It's a bit more than that. I think of middleware as a series of tubes or a series of pipes. And every single request from Django flows through all of these different middleware functions or classes and so on. And so, and it happens in order. And note that the very first thing listed here in this list of middleware is security middleware. And that the one after that is session middleware for, say, Django sessions, which we learned a bit about last week. And so every time Django gets a request, it passes it through all of these different, you can think of them as functions, and they do different things. And the security middleware, for instance, if, I don't know the details of what it does, but if it decides to, it'll send back an error response, right? And undoubtedly, that's where Django is enforcing this CORS rule, is somewhere in its security middleware. And it doesn't even have to get to our view function. So if I was writing some code for my Django app that I wanted to be used for every single request, every single time, like say the authentication middleware, then rather than, write a function or a class and import it in all my different views and stuff, I could write it as, undoubtedly in Django, middleware is probably a class. I could write some sort of middleware class and then apply it here. And we don't have to, and I just want to check in to see if that basic concept sort of makes sense to folks. And this is how we get that nice request object that has request.data and all of those things already set up and ready to go in our view functions, because the middleware has done that work of like turning the raw text of an HTTP request into an instance of a Python class and creating all those things on it. And so what we're going to do now is we are going to go ahead and add some middleware for handling CORS. And let me make sure that I do put this in the right spot. So I believe we do want it after the security middleware and the session middleware, but we want it before the common middleware. And again, kind of going back to the idea of what middleware is, this sort of makes sense. We want the existing Django security middleware to do the first thing, and whatever the session middleware is to do something as well. And then we want the CORS stuff here so that we can apply our CORS rules before we get too deep into this other stuff, so that we can then start allowing. So let's actually move this over here and let's go ahead and add some cores middleware. And now we can go ahead and configure this. And this is kind of what you were saying before, Brian. And I'm just going to go ahead and configure it here. And let me give myself a bit more room here to do this. And there's two ways to configure cores middleware. I can do what's called allowed origins. So if I want to allow all requests from some domain, if instead I say only wanted to allow requests from a subdomain, I would just add that. And then for us, we want to add our dev server. And let me go ahead and start the server up and see if that worked. And let's pop over to React and clear the console. And let's go ahead and run this. And now we get back the data that we wanted from the Django server. Test was connected. Test was successful. We are connected. And if we look over here, I'm not sure why that invalid is still there, but here we can see the response data. And in fact, if we look in our response headers, note what's there in the response header now is this access control allow origin header that tells the browser like, yes, indeed, this origin can make requests. One other way that we can do this that can be useful during development, because what if my port changes for my localhost, is I can also do cores allow all origins equals true. And in a lot of ways, I think that that's the easier path when developing. Because it just eliminates things that you might have to otherwise worry about. And then part of what we would do when deploying this to production is we would use the cores allowed origins list instead. And this maybe is set by an environment variable saying whether our Django app is in like development or production, which we'll learn about more a bit later. And this should work for me as well. We're now, it would probably help if, let's see, I killed the server because I mistyped something. And now we get the cores there as well. And I did see a couple hands up. Landon, yes, sir.
I was wondering if you could talk to like those URLs right there. When you like go on GoDaddy or you buy a domain, you have to like resolve the domain. I think it's called domain name system. And there's like you can put in different variations of your URL, like you wrote there on line 623, like a subdomain almost, like leaving off www. How do those two relate? Are they functioning parallel, or are they both attacking something completely different?
Yeah, totally. So that's a great question. So when you go to buy a domain, and a domain, which I think is synonymous with host name, that's the part that is readable and friendly to us, that the world sees, right? Example.com. And somewhere there is an IP address on whatever server is hosting our example.com. And the domain name system maps these domains to these IP addresses. You buy the domain. Once you have the domain, a subdomain is a part of that domain that you can add. So I could add a whole bunch of subdomains, but you only have to buy the domain, I believe. Now, this bit at the end is what can be the expensive bit. I always forget what it's called, and it would be domain extensions or top level domains. Yeah, so this actually, thank you, Google and HubSpot for helping to explain this. So there's only a couple domain extensions or top level domains. Com stands for commercial. EDU stands for education, right? And then the second level domain is, so an example.com. Com is actually the top level domain. The second level domain is example here. And that's where the prices can vary a lot, because it's frankly based on like popularity and what's most familiar to people, because there are actually a lot of top level domains now. A bunch more were created in the past several years. Right, there's .com, .org, .net, .gov. And there's all these other ones, and you all have seen websites, because it's pretty common these days where you see, you know, like, I don't even know where all these other top level domains come from. But the pricing gets cheaper on these because they're maybe like less familiar and less common. And that's sort of the price difference you might see between, say, example.com and example.baby. Or there's actually an Earth top level domain, example.earth. But the subdomains, you get those along with the account. Tom, yes, sir.
I don't know if this is a stretch, it might be, but do top level domains have to do with like location too? Because I noticed like internationally a lot of like like when I go to different countries, like if I like and if I'm in Germany, the .de top level domain is used a lot more. And if I try to access the .com website, there's a lot more latency. Same with like when I was in Latvia, I noticed like the .lv top level domain, and there was more latency from the .com extension more so than Germany. So I was wondering if there was like a location involved with the top level domains, or that's just maybe the having to do with the actual service there or not.
That is a good question. I honestly don't know. So I think my guess is that each country probably controls. I'm not sure. That's a little outside scope. That's a really good question. I just don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now.
Okay, sorry about that.
No. Like I said, it's a really good question, and I'm curious. But I'm honestly not sure, and I think there's a couple pieces there about like sort of, because they're sort of who controls the top level domains, and also if it's different for different countries. So I don't think there is necessarily like a regional component, but I'm not 100% sure on that. And so I think you had a question as well.
Yeah. So, for the cores allowed all origins, I know you were talking about setting it to true when, for dev, but Does that mean any like open source API is normally running that as true and not necessarily giving it allowed origins?
No. Any pretty much, well, it would depend on the API.
Because like when we're using the Pokemon API, we can use it from any
Yeah,
and project, and
yeah,
we never have to set anything necessarily. Is that correct?
yeah. I jumped the gun there. It's quite possible for a public API that they use allow origins equal true. There's also ways in the allowed origins list, like you can use regular expressions, I think. So you could do like star. I'm not 100% on this, but you might be able to do something. You might be able to use regular expressions to set different rules. It depends on the API. If it's like a big API run by, say, Google or something, they probably do have like an allowed origins list, and they probably have a list of like domains known to be used by like malicious entities, and they block those. Because I don't remember off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure you can have a blacklist as well as a whitelist. But that's more of like really big entities like Google and Microsoft, where they're actively keeping up with that stuff, and there's like certain IP addresses that become used by hacking groups and stuff like that. But for the Poke API, I think in effect you're probably right that they probably do have like cores allow all origins equals true or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. There's also services like, I believe it's Cloudflare or CloudFront, that are sometimes used that provide like a level of protection in front of this that will maybe do that more sophisticated stuff, like blocking requests coming from like known malicious IP addresses. Awesome. Any other questions around sort of the, and let me zoom out here, around the basic concept of cores and how we set up some allowed origins server side in our Django app? And Francisco, that's a great point as well in the chat, that there's some APIs to further answer your question, Saul. There's some APIs that only allow for like server to server conversations. So they might not want to see requests coming from browsers or stuff like that. Okay, awesome. Why don't we take 10? I realized that we ended up, I know this first part was a bit more discursive. So let's take a 10-minute break, and then we can dive into writing more front-end code to hook up like sign in and log in, sign up and log in functionality for our React app. Sound good? Okay, awesome. Thank you very much, folks, and see everyone in 10 minutes. So we have talked a bit about cross-origin resource sharing, and seen what that error looks like and how to solve that problem using Django core as headers. Just to recap, the essence is that we have to tell our Django API what other origins it is safe to receive requests from. Right. And the browser helps like provide error messages around those rules and stuff, but it's really the server that sets those rules. And we do that with the Django cores headers app, which we have to add in a couple places in settings.py to installed apps and to middleware. And then we tell it what origins are okay for cross-origin resource sharing. And for development, we're just going to have this set to be true. So now let's see how we can set up the front-end code to register, to save that auth token, and to log in with it. So the first thing I need to do is registration, because that's step one in the user login and authentication flow, right? Is first we're going to register, and then we're going to log in. Axios actually has a very useful helper function for us called create. And let's take a quick look to see what this does. Let's see if I'm not sure how to make that sidebar go away. This creates a new instance of Axios with some custom configuration that will save us some work. We can set a base URL, so I don't have to type the full URL out every time. If we wanted to, we could set a default timeout, which we're not going to worry about. And once we get our auth token, we're going to take advantage of headers to update the Axios, the headers that Axios will always send. Because once my user is logged in, I need to send that auth token on every single request. And we get all of the normal methods that we're used to with Axios here with get, delete, so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and use this in our front end code. And what we're going to do is here inside utilities.js, I'm going to import Axios. And I'm going to create it's a JavaScript object. I'm going to call it API. And this is think of this as our client API to talk to our own, or let me rephrase that, our API client to talk to our Django API server. And you'll often hear these programs referred to as client APIs. And when you start working with like third-party APIs, like big ones, there's often like client API libraries, like say for PayPal, like there's a PayPal JavaScript client API library and almost definitely one in Python so that you don't have to do all of that work yourself. They've done some of it for you. And like all things in JavaScript, it takes an object with all these configuration options. And our base URL is going to be HTTP 001 or localhost, and then the port that our Django server is running on, and then /API. And then a slash at the end of that, so that I can then, after this, add test or user or tasks or whatever I want. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to use this in app.jsx. So I'm going to import as a named import the API that we just wrote. And over here, I'm going to use this instead of Axios. And so this is an instance of Axios that we created. And let's go ahead and make sure that this works. And it looks like somewhere along the lines with writing my code, I did something that the dev server and the Python server didn't like. So let's restart the Python server. Let's make sure my dev server is still running. Let's try this again and see if this works. Beautiful. So I know that the Python server is running because I see it here, and we got back our test connection results. And we're now, and in fact, I don't need all that stuff. Right. And that was one of the advantages of creating an Axios instance. And I can import this everywhere and use it. And you can build this up. Like you could add methods around here and stuff if you wanted. But this is a good starting point. So let's go ahead and sign up and create an account and get that auth token. So we have a sign up page, but it's pretty empty right now. I'm going to go ahead and liberally borrow from Bootstrap. I'm going to just pretty much copy and paste this whole form in here and then do a little modifying. But I'm going to copy and paste in steps to try and minimize the chances of, errors that I might make and stuff like that. And I'm going to add a fragment there, which again, I think will make this a bit easier. And let's just add back that maybe an H2 for sign up. And now I'm going to grab this whole thing. I'm gonna format the document. I'm gonna double check that I'm loading the Bootstrap CSS, which indeed I am here in main.jsx. So my whole React application has access to that nice Bootstrap CSS. And let's look at these fields and let's look in our app. And I should be able to go to my sign up page now. And let's see, this looks good. And honestly, this looks good too. This is kind of perfect. Check me out. I don't think I need that. I'm not sure what that one's for. I think it's just to show off the checkbox. So we'll get rid of that. And now I do need something to happen when I click that button. And indeed, it looks like some form submission stuff is happening, which frankly is not quite what I want. So let's write a little code to maybe just handle this form button submission. And I think I am going to jump back to the Bootstrap real quick here to see if they have a particular way that they want us to do that. But otherwise, I'm probably just going to add in like an on click or an on submit. My guess is that we can just do on submit just fine. And someone can actually help me out here if I'm wrong. But let's do on submit and let's call it handle sign up form. And let's make a little function named and this is just going to be a placeholder for whatever else I do in here. And the first thing, not 100% if this is the right way to do it with Bootstrap. If it's not, we will we'll go ahead and fix that. I just want to see if this is taking me in the right direction. Perfect. And that looks like exactly what I want is I just don't want that default form behavior of the page refresh happening. And I'm going to have to hook these things up to React component state so that we can get our email and text fields. And can someone actually maybe remind me how to do that? Just if I want to hook up these fields to some React component state, how do I go about that? Tom, yes, sir.
On that form dot control, if so up above, if we made some state like email input, maybe, and we set that to an empty string to start.
Yep. And in fact, I'll import use state and I'll do
And
a
then in
little
that
formatting. And then over here,
form-
you were saying,
sorry, just add the I think it's the on change attribute.
yep,
And we could just pass in set email input in there.
yep, exactly. And I'll do a little more formatting. And let's see if this works. Nothing seems to break. If I go to my component dev tools, something about my React component dev tools is not playing happy. So but I feel pretty confident that this is working. And in fact, I think what I'll just do here is add a console log for the email field. And I see it there, so I know that it's working great. And Tom, that was awesome. Thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do the same thing with the password over here. I'm going to follow that exact same pattern, in fact. Except instead of set email input, we'll call it set password input. And let me go ahead and create that bit of component state here now as well. And let me just get rid of this stuff from the console and clear it. And now I've got my email and my password. Awesome. Thank you, Tom. And can someone else maybe help me, like, now that we've got this, how can I write some code to send a HTTP request to our Django API server to create a new account? And could someone help me maybe just get started with that process? Jordan Edge, yes, sir.
Would you have to know the URL attached to the sign up view in Django?
Yep, we absolutely would. And if I go over here to my Django app, and let's close this to get us a little more room. Let's go to just slash 8,000. And it tells us I'm interested in, I'm not sure if it's going to give us the list actually, but API/users. So it doesn't give us the list there, but we can just go ahead and peek. So if I go to my backend code and I go to the user app and I look at URLs py, I see that we've got /signup. So it's going to be API/users/signup. And what kind of HTTP request is this going to be, Edge? So like a get, a post, a put, a delete?
I believe it should be a post request.
Yeah, I think so as well. And we can hop in here and we can just confirm real quick if we see here's a post request for sign up and that we have to pass email, username is optional, and password. So I know I need to make a post request with some JSON in the body with username and password. And Edge, do you want to kind of guide me on the next step or sort of pass the mic to someone else?
I think I'll pass the mic to someone else. I don't know that I'm comfortable with what's next.
Okay, who do you want to pass the mic to?
Anyone know what the next step would be?
I can give it a shot.
Go
All right,
for it. And my hint is there's a pretty common pattern that you're all familiar at this point with any sort of HTTP request that we're making from React. You know, there's a couple things that we always have to do.
So I don't remember back, but basically you want to create a function so when you do hit the submit, it's grabbing those fields, the input fields, and then you're going to wrap that call in a use effect, and you're going to return and check like the return status in that in the empty dictionary, not empty dictionary, the empty list at the end of the use effect for the status.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what I'll do is I'll rename this function a little bit, and I'll make it an async function, and we can just use this to do all those things that you were talking about. And you know, I don't need these console logs at the moment. I'll keep the prevent default. So what would be my next step here in my async function to make the HTTP request to our API endpoint? Yes, sir.
I guess at this point, we'd go ahead and make the await Axios request. So
Yeah.
await Axios quit, post. And then we do the URL. See, localhost, was it 8,000?
Yep. And to make our lives a little easier, we can use this little API Axios instance that we created that has this stuff already in there. And so that's the one modification I'm going to throw into the mix is I'm going to go ahead and import that. And over here, we can just do API.post. And we already have all the /API stuff. So like I already have everything up to here. So I just need
The users /sign up.
Yep. And can you remind me, how do I pass in data for a post? Should I be passing in a JSON object here?
Let's see. Will we also be, no, we don't need the headers at this point, so we just pass a body. So an object with email. And then that would be event or the yes, and then password for the password input.
Yep, I think that looks good. And then, as was pointed out, we also need to then use the use effect, right? And we're going to call sign up user. And I forgot to add a wait right there. Francisco, yes, sir.
So just a small question. I see that we're working with a form and that we're creating this function as the onSubmit method. What would be the purpose of use effect in this case? Or what is it accomplishing for us?
That's a good question. I'm honestly just used to using use effect with any HTTP request in React. My understanding is that basically what it does is like use effects are guaranteed to happen in order, and it keeps React from rendering the sign up page before this fires, though I suppose actually those things might be less relevant in this instance because it's a sign up flow. What are you thinking?
So the reason why I ask is if I'm reading this correctly, that would mean that this function would get triggered upon the component mounting and it would send this request with empty data before the user even tries to input anything into the fields.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you're totally right. I'm so sorry, folks. I totally went on the wrong path there. Cause that you're totally right, man. That's exactly what would happen. That this page would load, the use effect would fire. Before anything happened, which is the opposite of what we want. I was thinking of the pattern for like fetching data, but since we have this hooked up to a button click, we don't want that use effect at all. Yeah, thank you, man. And I think we just that this is really all we need because this fires off when we click on the submit button, and then inside here we can handle whatever we want to do with the response and sort of follow up React stuff.
I see. Thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. That was, I'm sure we would have figured it out pretty quickly, but that definitely would have given us some really confusing behavior there. All right, so I think we're looking good here. Let's give this a shot and see how we do. And I think what I am going to do is take a quick look at our backend code, and let's look in the user app at the sign up model, because I want to look in here to make sure I know how to see if this succeeded or not. And we get back user, and we should get back a token. And the user is the display name, which will also be the email if we just pass email. So I think what I'm gonna do is go ahead and handle that here and add a if response.status equals 201, if we successfully created a user, I'm just going to console log and say successfully signed up, user info, and let's just do response.data and see what that looks like. Jens, I saw you had a question. Yes, sir.
Oh no, that's also what I was going to go for console.
Sounds good. Let's see how we're doing here. And that can go away. And I'm going to go ahead and clear this and clear the network tab. And let's do foo@gmail.com. And I always just use like XYZ123 for my password when doing this stuff. And let's go ahead and send a request. And it looks like we aired out. And let's see what the error is. Error bad response. So there's a bunch of error messages here, but here down at the bottom, because error messages are usually at the bottom of the top. You called this URL via post, but the URL doesn't end in a slash, and you have append slash set. Django can't redirect while maintaining post data. Change your form to have a trailing slash or set append slash false in Django settings. So we could set append slash false if we wanted to, but this is honestly a quick and easy fix without having to mess with settings.py. And let's go ahead and try this one more time. There we go. So now I've created a user. Though it looks like I was not quite correct about the username because I'm getting unknown back, but we get back the token, which is the most important part. And if I go to API/users, because I'm unauthorized, I'm not going to get anything. So that one's less useful, but with this gives me confidence that the user was created. If I wanted to, I could go into like PSQL or the Django console as well. I'll just open up PSQL. And we care about user app user. So I'll just do select star from user app user. And in there is my user. And it looks like first name and last name are unknown. So let's go ahead and fix that in our Django code so that we get something back in the name if we want to use it. And it looks like display name is probably coming from first name or last name. So I think for the moment, I'll just leave display name as is and not worry about it so much. And we can come back to it later if we want to. And I'll just kind of make a mental note to myself that this is probably coming from like first name, last name, or maybe we want to actually like pass a username field. So we've got our sign up flow working, right? And I have this on the sign up page. So a couple things need to happen now. We've got an auth token. What do we do with it so we can use it everywhere else in our Django application? So there's two things that we're going to do with the token. First, we're going to save the token to the browser's local storage, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And this local storage object we get this for free the same way that in the JavaScript console, we get the document object. And it looks like there's some older stuff in my local storage from ages and ages ago that I'll clear out in a second when we explore local storage. But so the browser creates these JavaScript really interfaces for us to interact with these different parts of the browser. And this is the browser's local storage. And it's a key value store. So you can think of it just like a Python dictionary. And the key we are going to name token, and the value will be, well, let's go ahead and get the auth token. So let's just do const token, and I think that's it because the user was unknown and the email we already have right here from email input. So I think I'll worry about the email later and just set the token for now. I'll go ahead and grab user as well, even though we're not going to use it. So we are saving that token that we get back from the browser to, sorry, that we get back from Django to our browser's local storage. And Axios lets us set default headers for every single request that it sends. And we're going to set an authorization header, which should look familiar from using Thunder Client when creating Django APIs with authentication. And we're going to set it to this token that we created. So what this command does is it tells Axios on every single request you send, set a header named authentication and set it to this value of, we just have the string token and then our actual auth token value. So let me talk quickly about browser local storage, and then we'll pause and check in and see what questions folks have. So the browser has a bunch of different ways that you can store things in it. We learned about cookies. There's session storage in addition to local storage. There's actually a tiny SQL database called IndexedDB in there. And the browser saves this stuff specific to different origins. And I'm not sure how those got into my local storage, but I'm going to go ahead and delete them. And browser local storage offers a number of advantages. Anything we put in there persists across sessions. A session is when I close, say, the browser tab or the browser window. So anything in there, I can quit the browser and reopen it later. So that's great. However, it does mean, if someone's like at a public library and does stuff and then stuff ends up in local storage, it's still there later on. So that's something to bear in mind. Like, we should never put anything sensitive in local storage. Local storage is exactly like a Python dictionary. It's a bunch of key value pairs. There is a limit, like 5 to 10 megabytes. In practice, it's almost always just text that we're putting in local storage, so that gives us tons of space. Local storage follows the same origin policy. So if we had, say, JavaScript that got loaded from a different host, from a different origin, and that other JavaScript was interacting with local storage, it can't get at our data from our to-do app. The browser keeps those things in separate containers and controls what code has access to it based on the origin of that code. We use this local storage object to interact with local storage in JavaScript. Local storage does not have an expiration date by default. It is synchronous, which is less relevant, but it means if we were doing tons of things that we are waiting for local storage to finish. And again, the main point here is we really don't want to store sensitive data in local storage. But an auth token is okay because the token itself is encrypted, and like what we do is on the server side, we could set the rule for how long we want that token to live, and that's how we sort of implement security around it. Now, if we were a bank, maybe we decide we don't want to ever store the auth token in local storage at all, right? But if we're Reddit and we want people to be able to log back on easily, then maybe we do want to store it in local storage. And so this is how, you know, if you log in somewhere and then like you close your browser and 6 hours later you open it up and you're still logged in, there is almost definitely a token stored in your local storage for that site. So let's go ahead and sign someone up and watch that value end up in local storage now that we've added that code. And let me actually do a refresh here. So there's nothing in local storage right now. And now you can see that in local storage, that token that was just created from this new user, the second one here, EA, so on and so forth, just got added in. And if I wanted to, I could grab it. So I just want to pause and check in and see what questions folks have. And let me catch up on Whiskey questions as well. Okay, I don't see anything in Whiskey questions. And do folks have any questions around saving the auth token to local storage or setting the Axios default headers and the things for our signup flow? Natalie, yes.
Yeah, can you just explain that part right there, the defaults.headers.common one more time? Is it just automatically setting that header, authorization header to the token, like as soon as someone signs up? Is there like
Yeah.
at any other point that we would want to, I don't know, I guess like take it away or do that again?
Yeah, great question. So if we poke around in the Axios docs, here we go. So Axios lets us configure some stuff that will be applied for every request we use with Axios. And the easiest way to do that is the way we did over here with this Axios.create with this little API thing. And that's how we set this base URL, because we already know what that is, right? But we don't know the value of the auth token because the user has to sign up or log in to get that token. So we can also, Axios gives us another way to set request headers that it will use for every single request. And we do it this way with defaults.headers.common to set the authorization header to the token. And Natalie, you're absolutely correct that we will have to modify this. For instance, if as a user I log out, then we probably need to delete this common request header from Axios. And what we're also going to see in a bit is like we probably want to add somewhere in app.jsx that the first thing our app does is look in local storage to see if a token exists. And if it does, set it as the common authorization header for Axios. Does that answer your question a bit more?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Oh, Francisco, yes, sir.
Hey Adam, could you go back to the project and pull up the dev tools real quick? I would like to. There was a question regarding explaining where we would like to store tokens during development versus deployment. So if you go to the application tab, you'll see that we have our local storage here, and our local storage is accessible through JavaScript, right? Everything is being exposed. We don't necessarily actually want to place sensitive information here, such as set token. We don't want our token to be, anyone shouldn't be able to interact with our token. This should be restricted, meaning that only the browser itself should be able to interact with this token, and the server should be able to interact with this token and no one else. If we go down to cookies, you can see there is this HTTP localhost cookies here. That currently has some CSRF tokens from something else. It's not from this current project. I'm not sure where those two come from. But essentially what we would do here is we would place our token inside of these HTTP headers as a cookie. And on that section where it says HTTP only, you'll see a green check mark. And that green check mark for HTTP only will make sure that the browser knows that this is only to be interacted with as from the browser itself. I'm sorry, from the server itself. So the server will not only set the cookie or will not only authenticate set cookie, the server will set the cookie to the browser and will also remove the cookie from the browser. Rather than utilizing something like local storage set item or remove item, our HTTP request and responses, or excuse me, our HTTP responses will give specific directions to the browser as to how it should be storing the token. Does that answer your question, Landon?
It does. Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah.
Thank you.
that-
I have advice.
No, thank you. That is a really good point. Actually, to kind of build on that, so just to illustrate, so for instance, here, if we look at local storage in a different tab, note that that token isn't there because the browser is applying the same origin policy. And if I go to console and I do local storage, get item token, we don't get anything, right? So the browser is enforcing that rule and provides a degree of security with local storage. But like you're pointing out, Francisco, if I'm like at the public library and I log on to Reddit and then I log out, and then someone else, the next user at the computer at the library wants to use Reddit as well, well, that's the same origin, and that definitely could be a problem with putting this in local storage. And in fact, I might need a little help, but let's see here. JS set cookie. And let's in fact set cookie HTTP only. So I'm not sure if this is the best way to do it. But let's see if we can like maybe show like creating a cookie. Though we would probably want to implement this server side though, wouldn't we? Yeah, I think this is I kind of, not to pun off of the cookie, but I bit off a bit more than I can chew, because I think if we're going to use a cookie, we may or may not have to do something server side to set it. I would actually have to check. So I will kind of pause on that one and we'll come back to it later. Because I want to make sure I don't get too off track in terms of implementing authentication flows and the other pieces here. Oh, and Francisco, thank you so much for mentioning that. Yeah, we'll circle back to cookies on day 3. So we've seen how once we get response data, we can put it into local storage. Let's see how we can kind of take that to the next step and set more information for our app once a user is registered. Like what I would like to be able to do is, well, I have the auth token set here, but I might want some user information that I can save and pass around within my app. And I might need some top level state. So I think what I'm going to do is we have user and set user here. Let's pass these down through outlet context. And let me add the second set of curly brackets that we need. And I think what I'm going to do is have user be an object, so I can add multiple properties on there. But we'll set it to null for now so that we can tell if the user is empty. But now what I can do here is in my signup form, I can use outlet context. And we can go ahead and set some user information here as well. Actually, I need to grab the outlet context first. I do apologize. And now we can do set user. And I'm going to set this to email, which we could have our API return as well. Just since it's not at the moment and we already have it, I'm just doing it this way. And we know that that user information that it's sending back is, I believe it's just supposed to be like the username. And I think that that's why it's empty right now. So I think I will just set this to, I'll just set it to user, and that way we can see what we get back there. But now we have this user object that has some information about our user that is available everywhere. And I think I actually do want to take a quick look at the form sign up. I think I'm not going to worry about username right now, and we'll just stick with email just for simplicity. But so now we can do some interesting things with this information. Eventually, our goal is going to be displaying the user's email in the nav bar, but we'll get there in a minute. And actually, I apologize, folks. Let me make sure that I get this right here. I apologize. I got a little confused on where we were. Let's go ahead and implement some login, and then I'll circle back to the nav bar. So the login function is going to look pretty similar to sign up. We could also put these in utilities, JSX. Sign up, I think, is only used in the one spot, so I think it's okay over there. Just to demonstrate, I think another way of doing it, I will go ahead and build the login page here. And in fact, if we have time, maybe we'll then like refactor and shift sign up back into utilities.jsx. But let's go ahead and write our login function, and I think that'll help us think about it just as like JavaScript, sort of independent of the user interface too. So we're writing an async function, and it's got to take in an email and a password. And can someone help me out in coding what this login function should look like? Well, we know we're going to get a response. And can someone remind me, is login a get, a post, a put? Well, let's go and check. Let me hop over to views.py in the user app. And if I look at login, I see that it's a post. And we need to send in the email and the password. And if I look at URLs py, I see it's /login. So very similar to our sign up function. It's going to look like this. It's going to be /login. And then we're going to pass email and password in the body of the request. And because this is an async function, we need the await. Yes, sir.
Do we still need the user slash in front of login?
Oh, we absolutely do. Thank you. So I think that looks about right. And let's add similar sort of logic that we did before, where we say if response.status is a success. And for login, I believe it's a 200. And here we're implementing some very similar logic to our sign up logic. We're going to set the token to local storage. We are going to set the default headers for Axios. And let's return as an object, the user data that we get, and the email. And then that way, when we use this login function somewhere, we can update our global state with the user's email information. So you can see, actually, if I am going to do a quick refactor here of, I think I'm just going to, well, I'll make a note to do refactor into utilities JS. We have almost the same stuff here. I would like have a handle sign up user that calls prevent default and otherwise looks very similar to what we have over here for our user login function. So let's go ahead and hook this up and get login working. And let me make this a little skinnier so we can focus on our code. And I'm going to do just a gigantic borrowing of this whole chunk of code, and we're going to go to the login page. I'm just going to paste that in there and delete that and do a little formatting. I'm going to change sign up to login, and we're going to change this to handle login. And I can, in fact, borrow all of these things from the sign up page because the login page is very, very similar. And let's do some importing of use state and use outlet context. And let's import our user login function. And let's write const and login. And this is where we'll deal with event.prevent default. And I might have to make this an async function because we're going to be calling an async function inside of it. So let's go ahead and do that there. And then I believe, and this is where doing a little bit of split screen work can be useful because I want to pull up utilities to look at the login page to see exactly what we have going on here, where we return 200 response. And I'll just add a simple else clause here that just says console log. Just something so if there is an error, we know where it's coming from. And I need to pass in the email and the password. And because this is an async function, I need to use await. And let's console log the user there to see if that's working. So I think this is most of what we need for login, but let's look at the user interface and give it a once over. Also, we have, I believe, a token. So let's go ahead and delete that token. We'll see how to build this into our application in a minute. But I want to clear my local storage so that when login succeeds, I see one token there and I know it's from me logging in. And it looks like I need to import some Bootstrap form stuff. So let's go ahead and do that now. And again, I'm going to borrow from the signup page. And we also want to set the user once we log in. So let me refresh this, make sure I don't have any errors. Test was successful. That's just our test message. So let me go ahead and clear the network tab and clear the console tab, and let's see if this works. And gonna just keep making up emails with the same password all day long. And fingers crossed, we'll log in. So I did get an error, bad request code. So let's see if we can get some data. Oh, and of course, I made the simplest of all mistakes. Can anyone tell me what it is? So this email doesn't exist. I was thinking about sign up, but we need to log in with an email that actually exists. So let's try foo. And I use the same password for everything for testing. So now we're cooking, because now we got the user response back. Now, if I go to the application tab, I see that token there. So now we just implemented login as well. So I want to pause and check in and see if folks have any questions. Let me catch up on whiskey questions. David, yes, sir.
I was wondering if you could just go over outlet again real quick, because I remember that, but I'm just having trouble really grasping what that did.
Yeah, totally. So outlet, remember, is this sort of special component that React Router uses to figure out what component to render based on our routing. So when I go to login or sign up or home, React Router is rendering the sign up page here or the home page here or the login page here based on the routing where I navigate, right? And then context, React context is a way for us to pass information down from a parent component really to any child component that we want without using props. And because I don't know if it's going to be the home page or the sign up page that renders in here. And we can watch, in fact, if we open this up. So this nav comes from the navbar component. This form stuff comes from whatever React Router renders inside the outlet. And it's going to look pretty similar, but we can watch it change, especially if I go to the home page. Note that now that form stuff is gone, right? React Router replaced it inside the outlet with the home page. If I go to login, it gets put there. So the question then is, how do I share data amongst these different components? And I can't do it with passing props because which components get rendered is not set in stone. It happens dynamically. So we can use React context. And React Router lets us use context with this outlet component. We give it an object. And then anything that gets rendered inside this object. And if my, let's see if this is working now. So I don't know why this isn't working for me at the moment. I do apologize. But if you imagine a component tree, there is an outlet component. It just doesn't itself display anything to the screen, but React Router puts these other things inside of it. So anything that gets rendered inside that outlet, we can use this use outlet context hook that will return that object for us. And so that's how we kind of pass that data around. Does that help break that down a bit more?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to go over that more later as well.
No, as soon as you said that, it clicked for me. Like you have the nav bar, and then the outlet is whatever router page you go to, it displays under that nav bar. So the nav bar is kind of persistent, and the outlet shows whatever page you're trying to access. But that really helped clear up how it's able to pass that context, because I was missing that. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Oh, Francisco, I saw you threw something in the chat.
Yes, in the Whiskey Questions channel, I put the diagram that we made earlier that kind of just iterates through how the application renders when it's utilizing outlet with React Router DOM.
Oh, yeah, this is a good one. Um, oh, it won't. There we go. Now I think we can get it up there. Uh, there we go. Everything was full screen, so it did not want to go to the other monitor. Yeah, so the outlet, you can see right here, we've got main.jsx, we've got the router, we've got app.js, and we've got the outlet component. And it's kind of a special component because it itself doesn't put anything on the screen, but React Router decides what to put inside it, all these other ones. And then the outlet context, anything that gets rendered inside here, we get access to. So let's, I've been going for a while. Let's go ahead and I think maybe add a little bit of conditional rendering to the navbar and then take a break. And then we can see some more some of the complexities around user application flows and handling page refreshes and logging out. So now that we can log in, what would be nice is if we had some sort of visual indication of this, such as like if this logout button, say, didn't show up when we weren't logged in, and if maybe we could see the user's name in the navbar. So let's hop over to app.jsx. So the navbar does not get rendered inside the outlet, so it cannot access this outlet context, but we can pass in user as a normal prop. And let's go ahead and do that right now. And let me go to the navbar. And I'm going to destructure that props object to get user. And so here, let's add a couple things. So we know that if the user exists, we're logged in. So here where it says home, maybe let's add like if user exists, let's render user.email or null. And so now, right, I have my username here. If I do a hard refresh, if I clicked on the right tab, that is now gone because we haven't seen how to hook up local storage yet to grab the token and log the user in. But if I go ahead and I log in, note that now my username is up there. So we can do a couple nice things with this relatively straightforwardly. We don't need to show login if the user is logged in. So I think I will just return null here. And if the user is not logged in, then let's show, we don't need to show the logout button either. So now, if I go here, there is no login because I'm currently logged in, but there is a logout button. If I do a hard refresh, there is a login button, but there's no logout. Right, and that's because this user object we set at top level state in app.js, and we do it when the user signs up or logs in. And that's one of the really cool parts of having top level state. So let me just pause and see if folks have any questions around that, and then let's take a break. Yeah, so there are any questions kind of around what I just implemented there? Edge, yes, sir.
Actually, never mind. I just figured it out. I was misreading your code.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, just to reiterate and to kind of show all the pieces. Let's do a little bit of a split here. We've got app.jsx, we've got the user object here, and we pass it into the navbar. And remember that what we've gone ahead and done is say in login, when the user logs in, we set that user React component state at the top level at app. And so now, for instance, on the home page, like we could also do the same thing of displaying information about the user here if we wanted. All right, let's take a break. Let's take 10. And I think when we return, that'll give us just enough time to see handling a couple more slightly sophisticated things with protecting access client side. You know, server side, we know that like you have to be logged in order to you know, successfully hit certain endpoints, but we can implement that client side as well for a nice user experience, and also grabbing the token from local storage so that say if the user refreshes the page or leaves and comes back, our app will actually grab the token, and if the token, assuming the token is still good, automatically log the user in for a really nice user experience. So let's take 10 and then we'll look at those things after the break. All right, cool. Thank you very much, folks, and see you all in 10 minutes. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We saw how to get the auth token, how to save the auth token, and how to save it in local storage. We've implemented registration and login, and we've seen that the code is really similar for both of those. We also jumped ahead a bit and we added some nice features so that if you know the user's logged in, they don't see the login page. Hopefully, if they're logged out, they do. Let's go ahead and implement logout so we have that working. And then we can see about handling like a page refresh and just improving the user experience for if they say paste in a URL, that our app can figure out if they're logged in or not. And the big picture here is if we kind of go to our TL draw, and let me sort of go over to a new zone over here. You know, we have Django, and we have our database, and we have the browser. And we're kind of getting the hang of thinking about our system as like having these three parts. And in fact, let me call this React app. And thinking about, well, if I'm thinking about the state of my application, I have to consider multiple places now, right? I have to make sure that my backend and front end stay in sync and that I get the data from the back end to the front end and the front end to the back end. And for some reason, that arrow just doesn't want to get longer. Well, now that we have local storage, it is another wrinkle and something else to think about, right? And I'll just call it browser storage, right? Because it could be local storage, or it could be a cookie, anything that persists. Anything client side that persists. Because it'd be nice if my user doesn't have to log in every single time. And if when we refresh a page, I don't have to log in again. And so this is the extra piece that we have to think about. And there are sort of three scenarios for this, and this is what we'll see in a minute. One is when the React app loads for the first time. Oops, sorry about that. There we go. So when the React app loads for the first time, we're going to have to check to see if there's a token or not, right? Then there's also a page refresh. If for some reason the user refreshes the page, we're going to also want to check to see if there's a token. And then the third scenario is the user pastes in a URL, into the browser URL bar. Maybe my friend sent me the URL to this cool app and he wanted me to go to this one specific page on it. So these are the three scenarios where our React app now has to check local storage or a cookie to see if there is an auth token. So I'm going to implement the logout functionality first because it'll be really straightforward now that we've done login, and it'll help us see some of these issues. And also we'll get full-fledged features. And then we'll tackle these last pieces in terms of getting this data and also nicely hiding and showing some data. So let me go ahead and refresh this page to get, so we don't see the logout button right now because I'm not logged in. So let me go ahead and log in, and I'm going to delete this token just so I have sort of a clean setup. And now the logout button is there. I can test it and do stuff, and our token is there. And let's find that logout button component where it's hiding, and it's hiding in the nav bar. So here in the nav bar is my logout button. And I know when I click on it, I want something to happen, right? I want the user to log out. I think what I want to do though, is I want to put the logout function right here in utilities.jsx. I really should have put in the sign up function here because it's nice to kind of have this code separate and be JavaScript only and have it all in one place. You get to see the patterns, you can copy and paste, and you can kind of make it more efficient. So let's go ahead and write our logout function. And it's going to be an async function. And here we don't have to pass any arguments in because we don't need an email or a password to log out. And can someone there are a couple things we're going to need to do to properly log out, right? We're going to have to, do like a post/API/users/logout call. What else might I want my React app to do when the user logs out? Tom, yes, sir.
I want to delete the token from the headers.
Yeah. We had like those Axios, comment, headers. We don't want the auth token in there. Where else is the auth token that we probably want to get rid of it from? Lewis, yes, sir.
Yeah, local storage.
Yeah, exactly. So now this way, there's no token hanging around once the user is logged out. I'm on the public library, I log out, and all this stuff is gone. So let's go ahead and implement this. And we're going to use our API, and we're going to make a post, and we're going to go to users/logout. And I don't think we need to put anything in the body of that request. Let's check that. Let's do views.py in, I think this is the one most, no, we'll use the sidebar instead just to take a look. I'm gonna go to the back end, users app, and we'll go to views. And if we scroll up a bit, somewhere around here, there's logout. Indeed, nothing needs to be passed to the logout, and we get a 204 response when the logout is successful. So we await the response. If response status is 204, if the user has been successfully logged out from Django, then let's go ahead and do this other stuff. We're going to do delete API.defaults.headers.common authorization. And this will delete that property from this common headers object. And let's go ahead and delete this from local storage too. And we can do local storage dot remove item. Okay. And I'll just add a console log here, just saying user log, just so we can watch it happen. And I'll add an else statement here, just saying console.log, error logging user out, and we'll just print the whole response. So now I've got a user logout function that looks pretty reasonable. I might as well return something which is null, will return null. If the logout is successful. And now let's go ahead and use this in the navbar. So on click. And I think we have to wrap our async function in an arrow function. And I thought I exported it correctly. Let's find out. There we go. So let's see if this works. So if this works, I should see an HTTP request go to Django. I should see that message in the console, and I should see that token disappear. So I'm not sure that any of that stuff happened. So let's figure. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I don't think you're calling the function on line 20.
Oh, you're so right. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I wrapped it in the arrow function and then I forgot to call it. let's try this one more time. So we ran into some sort of issue. Request failed with status 401, error bad request. Let's see if the Django console gives us some useful information. And I'm just seeing unauthorized. So this makes me suspect that maybe my user was not logged in. Let's see if the auth token was sent on the request. So if I look at my request headers, I should see an authorization token here, but I don't. And what that tells me is that it's either an issue in my logout code, or maybe something is not right with the state of my app and my user was not actually logged in. So let's take a quick look at utilities JSX. This all looks good. So I'm just going to do a hard refresh and log a user in again. And delete the token. Though really with the token here, this should work, but let's do it just for sanity. So I now have a token. So I now should be able to log out. And now it goes away. And now we see the user logged out message. So this is a common challenge with full stack development, is to kind of go back to this TL draw diagram. I have to think about the state of like, what do I have in local storage and with my app? And somehow I got those two things out of sync, which is easy to do. So that's something I think that's valuable to add to your debugging workflow. And actually, let me go ahead and show, I think the last bit, because I realize we're getting a little tight on time, but of how to handle a page refresh and the user loading in so that we don't run into this issue so much. So we might go a couple minutes over noon, but I think we'll get to the last and most valuable point here. So remember, the three scenarios we need to think about are when the app loads for the first time, on a page refresh, or if a user pastes the URL into the browser URL bar. And we want to make sure that in all those situations, our React app is in sync with whatever may or may not be in local storage. So what I need to write is some sort of function that will check local storage for a token. And if there is a token, attempt to log the user in. And we're going to call this function user confirmation. So we're going to attempt to get the token. And if there is a token, we are going to attempt to log the user in. So I think what I'm going to do is we'll set the defaults. So that the API call will use the token. And we will do hit this user's endpoint, And if we take a quick look in Django, we can see what this one is doing, and I believe it will return back some user data, but let's confirm. If we go to the user app, we check out views. Let's check out URLs PY. We see it hits the info class. So indeed, we're going to get back some info about our user, but let's just confirm. And we can see here that there's a put request. I am not actually seeing a get. So we might want to add a get request, which I think should be relatively straightforward. I think we would use, I don't think we would even need to log in because we would have the auth data. So I think it would look something like this. And I think we could even just return response status equals HTTP 200. And we could just return the user. We may not even need that. And I think I'll just get rid of and I think we'll copy that one in and put it in here. So now this info class should have a get endpoint where we send back some user information. Let me just make sure I'm sending back user information in the right way. So again, I'm going to look at the login one as a reference. And here, in fact, I think I want it the other way because I want my Python dictionary with my user information up front. So let's make it look like this. And make sure that I have that right. Yep, user.displayName. I probably don't even need this our user, but it's not hurting. It's not harming anyone, so I'm just going to leave it there. I think now we should have a get request on that info endpoint. So if we hit URLs PY with a get, we'll get some data back. So if we go back here, we know that we're going to get back an object that is basically just going to have the user's name, but I think I also want the email to come back as well. So I think that should do it as well to get the user's email. And let's just console log response.data to see how that goes. And we'll do, if response status equals 200. As I just want to make sure that this code works before getting too much further into it. So we've hooked this up. We've created this, but now the question is, how do I use this? And how can I use this before app.jsx renders? Right? Because ideally, what I want to do is here in app.jsx, right away, I want to check if there's a user or not that already exists in local storage. And if there is, I want to set that user information. So if I wanted to, I could do like a use effect here and make that HTTP call. And that's a pattern that we've all seen. Now that our React apps are getting a bit more complex, there is something that React Router gives us that's really powerful. That's called a loader. And that's what we want to use. And so what a loader does is it executes a function before rendering a component. But React Router will do this for us. And it would help if I put this in the right spot. It would be right there. So every time React Router navigates to the homepage, before rendering app, it will call this user confirmation async function that we've created over here, which will check local storage for a token. And if there's a token, it will do all this stuff. And I think I'll just add an else statement here that just says console log user confirmation, no token, and local storage, just so I get some data if I need it. And the way that we can use this is, not surprisingly for React, with a hook. And that hook is called use loader data. And so React Router will call this async function before app renders. Use loader data lets us grab any data from it, and we'll assign it to this user object. And I think what I'll do here is I will make sure that, well, first of all, it would help if I made sure to return the data in my use confirmation function, as right now we're actually not returning anything. So let's go ahead and return some stuff here. And I believe it's user, and then email will be response data email. Otherwise, we are going to return null. And over here, we'll also return null, just so we're always returning something. And so now I should get some good console log messages. And in app.jsx, this should either be set to user data or to null. So let's test this out. Let me check the state of my front-end app right now. My user is not logged in. So let's see how that works. Let me refresh the page. So user confirmation, no token in local storage, looks good. Let's see if we made the HTTP request to get that data. I'm actually not sure if we did. Let's look at the Django server logs. I think that might be a little easier. So let's go ahead and clear this. And now, oh, and of course we're not making the request because there is no token at all. So I got a little confused about the flow of the code. But remember, we only hit the /users endpoint if we have a token. So let's go ahead and log in. And now I've successfully logged in. Let me confirm that there is indeed a token. There is a token. And let's clear the network tab and clear the console. And fingers crossed, when I refresh the page now, we see our React app make that HTTP request, that GET request to /users, just so the /users endpoint on our Django API. And we should get some user information back. So this looks good. User unknown, email foo. Though I'm not sure if I'm seeing the console logs. I want to make sure this maybe isn't from something else that I got confused about. So let me look in. So first of all, I see over here, get API /users. So that's a good sign. And if I look in the network tab over here, here it is, users. And the response indeed has our user email, which is awesome. And in fact, now that email is up there. So this is great because we now have written a user confirmation function that will search local storage for a token. If it's there, send a API call to our Django API to get information about this user, and we can get whatever information that we want. And by leveraging this really nifty React router feature called a loader, this gets called every time the app JSX gets rendered. So this is the first thing that happens, and this is how we can keep our front-end app in sync with local storage, so we don't run into that issue that I saw before where it kind of seemed like I was logged out, but it wasn't quite there. That's really the big thing that I wanted to show. I think maybe the only other thing is let's see, like, for example, what happens if we go to the homepage. And of course, it's not named home, it's just /. And let's do a hard refresh. Right, and homepage is set to index. So this is great. This is really nice. If we change this to /home, let's see what happens, just out of curiosity. That one may not be working, maybe because I got rid of the index. So I'm not going to worry about that too much.
I think you have to name it path instead of index. If you
Oh,
want
yeah. Thank you so much. So this is awesome because I can see that not only is this loader working for app, but it's working for my child roots off of app as well. Right? Because app gets loaded first and then all of these other ones. So any root that's a child root of app, now this loader gets fired for. And let's go over to the homepage here. And I realized I ran a bit long. I think I do just want to demonstrate two things to sort of wrap up. And that will be, I think, a really good stopping point, and we should be able to get through that in about not more than 10 minutes. So thank you all for kind of sticking through, and let's just look at one last thing and take it on home. So if we go to app JSX, user gets updated by all sorts of things, signing up, logging in, logging out. So, you know, if we wanted to, we could write a use effect that listens to user. And we could just maybe add a console log statement saying, you know, user updated, and that prints it. But this is cool because if I go to the console and I clear all this stuff, and let's say I log out, I wonder if I missed something in the logout and we're not updating user. Let's actually go and check that out real quick. So indeed, that is actually something that I missed here in the logout, is we are not updating user in our app state. So let's go ahead and do that now. And I think the way I will do that is we're going to have to pass set user in as an argument. Oh, Francisco, yes, sir.
I thought the hooks could only be used within a component and can't be passed into a function. And then I was wondering if there's a way to handle this from the nav bar, since we're having a return statement coming back from that.
Oh, I see your point. Yeah, I think that's a really good call to handle it from the nav bar. I agree. Thank you. I think, yeah, for the record, I think we could pass in set user as an argument once we got it. somewhere else from a hook, but I think you're absolutely right that the nav bar is the better spot to do this. And so let's pass in set user to the nav bar. And we'll do that over here. And let's take, if we go down here, this user logout, let's just create a little function called handle user. Logout. And this way we can just put all our stuff in there. And I'll make this, I think. I think this is gonna have to be async. And then we can do something like this is logged out equals await user logout. This can be refactored to be a bit better, but just to get the ball rolling. And in fact, I think what I'll do here is I'll just return true, else we return false. And then that makes this a bit better because we can say just if logged out, set user null. And then here we'll do handle user logout. And these squigglies are just props validation errors. So hopefully now I should be able to log in a user. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I don't know. This is some extension I was playing with that I need to disable. I apologize, folks. My user's logged in. Now, if I log out, hopefully this foo@gmail.com will go away here. And there we go. And we see that user updated console log message coming from this use effect that we put in here. And what we can also do with this is we can use this to set some rules around. So like if I paste in, say, sign up, but I'm already logged in, I don't want to go to the sign up page. Like this is great if I'm not logged in, but if I'm already logged in and that auth token is there and I paste this in, I want to go to the home page. So let me just log in real quick. So that, let's see here. Huh, and I wonder, that's something to debug for another day. So now that we're logged in, let's see how we can write a little code to improve the user experience for pasting in certain URLs. Because to go back to TL draw, we wanted to think about the React app loading for the first time and the page refresh. And we've got React app loading for the first time. We've handled page refresh. Our React router loader does that. But now if the user pastes in a URL, that's what we want to handle. So what I can do here is let's have a variable named null user URLs. And these are should redirect to homepage if logged in. And we can check if the user's logged in or not. Because we have that information already. And we will have to do a little bit of work here. But what we can do is let's check if current URL is one that might need to redirect. So from that list, let's see if it includes the current URL that we're at in the browser, which we do with location.pathname. And if a user exists and they are navigating to one of these URLs that should redirect, let's just go ahead and navigate them to the homepage. So I am going to import the use navigate hook, excuse me, from React Router DOM. And up here, let's do navigate equals use navigate.
I think you need to use location as well for location.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. I think you're right. I think I got that confused with window.location. Thank you. That is not the right name for the hook.
It's from React Router DOM, not React.
Oh, thank you so much. That would be why. There we go. I was wondering about that, and I like hovered over location, and I think VS Code got too smart and was like thinking about window location. This looks a lot more like what we're expecting. And so now, if a user exists, if we're logged in, and the user is trying to navigate to one of these pages where like they really don't need to go because they're already logged in, we navigate them to the home page. So I'm just going to test this bit to make sure that it works. So my user is logged in. So fingers crossed. So sign up. Let's see if this works if I hit enter with it. No, it looks like something is not right. So let's do a quick console log. Francisco, yes, sir.
So I think for your node users, you may need the slashes since path name demonstrates the path name with slashes. So sign up is missing
Oh
it.
man.
And secondly, I think your use effect, oh, you need one at the beginning as well of sign up.
Oh yeah. Oh, thank you so much, man. The slashes are the worst. Thank you.
Yeah. And then as far as when this use effect is triggered, it looks like currently it's only being triggered when the state of user changes. But if we want it to be triggered upon something else, we might have to add that to the dependency list.
Yeah, thank you so much. That is sort of, I totally forgot that step, and that is sort of the secret sauce here. So I think interesting. If we go to so let's see, user is allowed. Let's redirect to, oh, maybe. Let's see if that typo, yeah, let's see if that did it. There we go. So there's a little bit of a flash that happens. And there are other patterns that we could do to avoid that if we wanted to, but that's not the end of the world. And I had a couple typos there in my code. I needed the 2 ampersands and I needed the slashes. And then the biggest thing being that this use effect hook needs to listen to path in the dependency list so it knows when to fire. Right, so that whenever we change this, it then takes the user back over to the home page. So that was the last major piece that we wanted to kind of like demonstrate to you all to kind of see how you can hook these pieces up. I realized that I ran a bit long, so thank you all. I really appreciate your patience. And Francisco, yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Adam. I was just gonna ask if you could add that else if statement to handle the no user being within a not allowed.
Yes, and I think that's actually the one where I wanted. Oh, where actually I might need a little help in making sure I'm understanding the logic so that if we don't have a user and they're not so this is like when a logged in user tries to go to sign up and so on. And Francisco, am I understanding correctly? This is for when a not logged in user, I see, tries to go anywhere but sign up or log in. We redirect because the user needs to log in before we let them do anything else. And Francisco, am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. That's
Yeah,
perfect.
I think I am. Yeah, no, I appreciate that because I actually I wasn't quite seeing that one at first. So, but this is perfect. So yeah, so folks, we have two scenarios here. And in fact, we could maybe rename this to something else, but one if statement is for when we have a logged in user and they're going to, the sign up page or the login page. Well, for user experience, let's just redirect them to their homepage. Plus, it also it makes our lives a little easier because we don't have a logged in user trying to log in by mistake. And then if someone is not logged in, while Django on the server side won't send back data, we can provide a much nicer user experience by just saying any user that's not logged in needs to be redirected to the home page where they'll then see like the login or the sign up screen. We don't have a lot of other data here right now. So we don't, I apologize that we can't demo this, but if you imagine like if there was a to-do list page, for example, and a not logged in user tried to navigate there, they would be redirected back to the home screen. Well, and that one doesn't exist, so we hit the application error, so it doesn't even get triggered. And yeah, now we have a fully hooked up front end and back end with authentication. And while we didn't get to showing creating to-dos, because with Django and Django REST frameworks token authentication, you get the correct user with that token. It makes the rest of that dramatically simpler, as you've seen. And now we have that token here as well. So that like once a user is logged in, all the to-dos and everything they create is specific to their account. And there's really no way for them to see someone else's to-dos or anything like that. Yeah, so let me just check in and see what questions people have around this. And I realize we ran a bit long too. let me go ahead and stop the recording then. Oh, Crystal, yes.
Yeah, so do you have like recommendation on when we start working on our apps, like the flow of how we should start like working on different components of it?
For the full stack or front end or back end?
Yeah, I guess like should we start back end and move
Yeah.
front end?
Yeah, it's a good question. Probably you either want to start with the models or you want to start with the front end with thinking about like pages and building out the user interface. Different people prefer different ways. If starting with the models feels comfortable for you, I would say go for it. If that feels less comfortable, then it may be easier to start building out the front end first, because that will kind of help you figure out what your models are as you're building that user interface, right? That said, what I actually would recommend for the personal project is, since all the personal projects are going to need user accounts and the ability to log in and sign up and log out, I think that is a good starting point because that's really core functionality. And once you have that done and this authentication hooked up, basically what we did today, then build the other stuff on top of that. Because for most things for your personal project, you're probably going to want to leverage authentication and user accounts and stuff. So I would say maybe start with that. And then you can either build out the front end more if you like that way, and that'll help you discover what your model should be like. Or if you want to start with the models, you can do that and then transition to the front end. Francisco, I don't know if you have any other thoughts there as well.
I do the kind of like a hamburger method. So I draw out what my front end should look like. And from drawing out each individual page and component, I could kind of identify what kind of data is it that I need for my
Yeah.
backend directory to send. So then I could build my HTTP responses out of those drawings. And then from those responses, I could build out my model as to what fields there should be inside of each model. And then when I actually start programming, I start from the models to serializers through views and then move on to my front end. So that's the way I go about it.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I know I've kind of shown this like thinking in React Doc before, but they kind of recommend something similar. I think like you were saying, Francisco, starting by kind of drawing out what you kind of want your front end to look like is a really good starting point. And like you said, it then lets you think about like what HTTP requests do I need to send and what data do I need to get back, and that can help with the models. Does that help a bit, Crystal?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
For sure. No, that's a great question. And I think that's one of the common challenges and part of like the learning of the personal project as well. Let me go ahead and stop the recording so that folks can break for lunch, but I'll stick around for a bit if folks have additional questions.